Thank you, Katie. Good evening, everybody. Again, if I haven't said hello to you tonight, it's great to have you here. Great to have you in the room. Thank you for being here. A warm welcome, particularly if you are new, and particularly if you are joining us online. We are progressing through Colossians. We are now in our fourth week, not our fifth. We're in our fourth week. Just exploring this letter and just taking our time to slowly go through it. I'm hoping that some of us here have been following the reading plan just to kind of like further immerse ourselves in this story, in this particular text, so that we can better understand it. Paul has spent so far, if you've been journeying with us, Paul has spent his time so far focusing on the implications that flow out of who Jesus is and what Jesus has done. So in chapter 1, Paul spends time highlighting and emphasizing the supremacy of Christ, that Jesus is Lord of all creation. After that, he then speaks about things we should do that flow out of that fact, right? So because Jesus has died, we should act like this. Paul has spoken about the mystery of Christ, namely being that it doesn't matter whether you are Jew or non-Jew, Jesus Christ is for all. And you can have access to Jesus, you can have access to God, through Jesus, not on a particular law. Last week we looked at just the reality that we often know that Jesus is all that we need, but we often fall into the trap of maybe thinking that there's something more, or maybe thinking that we're not doing enough, or maybe thinking that there's something else out there that we haven't yet reached. And so we believe these lies, or we believe these tales that we might need to do X, Y, Z. And Paul's saying, no, Jesus is all you need. All the fullness of God rests fully in the person of Jesus. This all flows out, Paul is telling us, all these ideas flow out of Paul's understanding of what Jesus has done on the cross. But in chapter 3, he shifts his perspective slightly. He begins to consider how we should act, not just in light of what Jesus has done, but also in light of what Jesus is going to do. That is, the story is not finished yet. There is more to be written, namely that Jesus is coming back. There will be a resurrection, there will be a new heavens and a new earth, there will be a life to come. Yes, Jesus died, and that means a whole lot, right? That does mean a whole lot. But he's also coming back. There will be a future glory. This is not the only life that we live, and this fact alone changes everything. Paul grounds the chapter that we're about to read, all the instruction that he gives, all the encouragements, all the kind of do this, don't do this, all this is grounded in the fact that Jesus is coming back. And so he spends the beginning 4 verses on this. We're going to spend a fair bit of time just looking at this and thinking about it, because it's going to help create a framework for how we understand the rest of the passage. So if you have your Bibles with you, I'm going to encourage you to have them open in front of you on your lap. I think it's page 1184 or 5, somewhere around there. We're finger on the text, just kind of looking at what the scripture says, seeing what we can do to understand it. So beginning at verses 1 and 2. Paul says, he gives these 2 instructions. He says, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, and set your minds on things above, not on earthly things, right? Set your hearts on things above, set your minds on things above. Now, if we wanted to translate this literally, we would say, a really wooden, word-for-word kind of translation would be, the things above, think about, and the things above, set your mind on, right? Just really simple. It's 3 words in Greek, really simple, just clear instruction for us. The things above, think about. The things above, set your mind on. So what does it mean to think about the things that are above? The word that Paul uses here can be translated as think, but it can also be translated investigate, examine, inquire, wrestle. It speaks of devoting serious time and energy. It speaks of devoting serious resource to this task. That is, this isn't something that I just think about when I'm driving home from work. This isn't something that I just speculate on when I'm in the shower, and once that's over, all good. Paul is saying, no, devote time, devote energy, give it everything you've got, search deeply and intently on the things which are above. This word is used throughout the Bible, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. In the Old Testament, it's used in the Psalms, deeply searching for Yahweh. right? Like, search my heart, Lord. Or just waiting in the presence of God just to better know and better understand. This word is also used when King Saul, if you know the story, when King Saul is hunting David. And if you know that story, King Saul just like abandons all responsibility, like it's not the right thing to do. He abandons all responsibility so that he can hunt down this one guy. He invests a whole amount of resource, a whole amount of time, neglects everything else so that he can find this one guy. Now that's wrong, but that word of searching is the word that's used when Saul's doing this. It's also the word that's used when Jesus is lost, when he's a young boy. He's lost and his parents search for him for 3 days. It speaks of that searching that you might do if you're a parent and you can't find your child in the shopping center. You're not casually walking from store to store or aisle to aisle. You are frantically and deeply searching for that which is lost. And then the things above set your mind on. So we're to think about, we're to investigate, we're to wrestle, and this takes time, but we're also to set our mind on it. This speaks to just making a decision and living out of that decision. Don't just speculate, don't just deliberate, don't just wrestle, but actually come to a point where you land on something and then allow your life to live out of that. In essence, spend your time thinking and researching and asking hard questions and reading and listening and documenting and podcasting, everything that you can possibly do to better understand the story and the character of God. If, as verse 1 says, Christ is seated at the right hand of God, and if, as Paul says elsewhere, Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, and if, as Paul says here, Christ is going to appear in glory, if these three things are true, then living life in light of that truth is of the utmost importance. Then embracing that truth, allowing it to control and influence our decisions, that is the best possible way to live. There is no other alternative that comes close. Paul's saying, allow the story of God to shape your story. Let me say that again. Allow the story of God, what he has done, what he's doing, and what he will do, allow that to shape your story. In verse 2, Paul makes the contrast between the things which are above and the things which are below, or the things above and earthly things. We are to live our lives out of God's truth and not the truth that the world or the earth or our culture gives us. And here Paul specifically highlights one aspect. He says, set your mind on things above, not earthly things. You died, your life was hidden in Christ. And note this last line here. He says, when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. Paul highlights here the resurrection. That is, the part of the story that Paul's really focusing on is not necessarily the fall of man, although that's important. It's not the incarnation of Jesus, although that's important. What Paul's wanting us to focus on here is the fact that Jesus is coming back, that there will be a resurrection, that there will be a life to come, that there will be a new creation. And Paul wants the Colossians to set their minds on that fact and not on earthly things. So again, we're just going to spend some time thinking about this. What was the earthly alternative to this? What was the common story back then that everybody believed when they might think about life after death? For the Greco-Roman world, that is Paul's time, the dominant culture in Paul's day, there actually wasn't too much thought about the life to come. It was really diverse and it was really, really vague. So some believe that if you died, your soul existed kind of in this meaningless existence, right? Like your ghost or your essence, whatever it might be, your mist or whatever, like just randomly roamed the underworld, kind of like doing nothing, just being, right? Just this meaningless existence, not interacting with anybody, not doing anything, just simply there. I don't know if you've seen the cartoon movie Hercules, but like that underworld where the souls just kind of like, they're just floating in the river, right? Just doing nothing, looking like this, right? Like it's that. Other thinkers just said that there was no life after death, that this is all we have. So the common idea from a particular thinker in that time was eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Maybe you've heard of that. This idea, there is no life to come, so just do whatever you want to do now. Drink as much as you want to drink. Do whatever brings you happiness. Do whatever brings you pleasure, because there's no consequence. Just focus on your happiness. And others did believe in some type of afterlife, but it was kind of reserved for the great ones. So again, thinking of Hercules, I don't know why Hercules keeps coming up tonight. I don't really care too much for him. But in his story, like in the actual, the stories about him in Homer, Hercules, after he's done all his great things, he goes on the funeral pyre, he's burnt, and then the story says that his body is like lifted up into the heavens. And so there's this afterlife for him, but just purely because he's a great one. He's a hero, he's done great things. That's not the everyday, every person experience, right? You and I don't get that, right? That's reserved for the kings, for the heroes, for the great ones. The main idea that existed back then in Paul's time was that this life is all that you have. If there's anything after death, it's nowhere near as enjoyable or pleasurable or meaningful as what we have now. So, if this is all you have, then make the absolute most out of it. That's the culture that Paul's speaking to. And again, the reality is that our culture now is not actually that different than what Paul was speaking to back then. With the growing rejection of Christianity and religion, particularly in places like 21st century Sydney, convictions about life after death grow weaker and weaker. We don't think about it, maybe because for a lot of us, particularly a lot of us who are in the room, that's just like really far away. So like there's no need to really think about it. Like I'll worry about it maybe when I get a bit closer. Or maybe for some of us, it's just the idea of our own mortality is scary and we don't like that. So it's kind of, we'll put it in the too hard basket. We're not going to talk about it. All this leads to is vague ideas, weak convictions about what the future might look like, about what life after death might look like. I don't know if any of you are familiar, Stephen Colbert, who does The Late Show, or one of the late shows. He has this spot in his show where he asks his guests, in kind of like a rapid fire segment, he asks his guests, what do you think happens when we die? I'm not sure if you've seen that, right? He asks that question, what do you think happens when we die? And the answers are as vague as they are diverse. So one celebrity says, right, popular celebrity, one celebrity says, we become stars. One says we go somewhere good. Another says, I hope something happens that we don't understand. I don't understand what that means. Another says something peaceful. Another says we join the universe, or like we just kind of join the whatever's out there. Another says nothing happens when we die. Like we weren't here before we lived and we won't be here after we die, and so like nothing happens, right? And often these answers are met with rapturous applause from the audience. And the host is like, great answer. And everyone's like, yeah, that was so good, like so deep. And I'm screaming at the TV. I'm like, he didn't actually say anything, right? It's vague, it's empty, it doesn't make sense. Our culture does not have strong convictions about a life to come. And so the default position is that this is all we have. And if there is something after, it's got nothing on what we are experiencing now. So I have to make the most out of my life right now because it's all I get. The danger here, and listen carefully, the danger here is that if we follow this train of thought, and if we allow ourselves to be influenced by that way of thinking, we end up living lives that are deeply self-centered. If this life is all I have to experience happiness, then I need to do what makes me happy, and only I know what makes me happy, so I'm just going to listen to myself, and no one has the right to tell me what to do. Right? Like that's our culture at the moment. If anyone tells me something that contradicts my happiness, or my well-being, or my comfort, or my joy, then that person is a threat, and they need to be treated as a threat. So this leads to all sorts of ways that we engage in things like politics and how we engage with the other side, right? Our culture dictates that because we think this is the only life we have. So if I don't get what I want now, that's bad. I'm going to miss out. This is the earthly way of thinking that Paul says we are not to set our minds on. We are not to live like this. I don't know if you pay attention. I don't know if what I'm saying is resonating with you, but if you look at the world outside and you see people that actually fall into this way of thinking, and all they seek to do is just fulfill themselves and satisfy their needs and their happiness, that's what's happening out there. But our world is a deeply unhappy place. It is deeply angry. It is deeply unsatisfied. This way does not work. Paul recognizes that, and that's why he's saying, don't live this way. Don't live your life out of the cultural narrative. Live your life out of God's narrative. And so Paul says that this life is not the only life that you will live. For those of us who are in Christ, there is another life to come. And Scripture tells us that this life to come is not just like 2.0, but it's actually far better, far greater, far more pleasurable, far more enjoyable, far more meaningful than anything we could possibly experience in the here and now. The life to come, the new creation, the new heaven and the new earth, what Jesus has waiting for those who trust in Him, far outweighs anything that we could experience now. It's not that we just join the universe. It's not that we become ghosts on a cloud, right? Just kind of like singing Kumbaya forever. It's got purpose. And this has radical implications for how I live my life. It means if I experience difficulty in this life, it's okay. There's something else coming. It means that if things don't pan out the way I want them to, either in the mini or in the major, that's okay. It means that if there are times, for long or for short, when I am not happy, when I am unsatisfied, when I am sad or mad or whatever it might be, that is okay. It means that I can hold things loosely and I don't need to freak out when plans don't go my way. Paul says elsewhere, I consider that the sufferings of this present time, that is the difficulties that I might face now, the complexities I might face now, the hardships I might face now, I consider that these things are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed to us. No matter how bad it might get now, it's still got nothing on the life to come. If I stay committed to Jesus and His way, even if I don't understand it, right? Even if it doesn't make sense, if I stay committed to Jesus and follow His way, then the life He offers me is infinitely better than the one that I can create for myself in the here and now. Let me say that again. The life that Jesus offers me is infinitely better than the one I can create for myself in the here and now. And there's so much more that we could say about this. But I just want to plant that flag there. This lays the foundation for what flows in the following passages. Jesus offers us a better life. So if we have to sacrifice and struggle, it's okay. It might not seem like it at times, and I understand that for a lot of us here that have gone through hardship, like that is hard. It's far easier said than done, but it's okay in the light of eternity. So, with this established, let's jump to verse 5. Here, Paul dives into a set of instructions. He says in verse 5, put to death whatever belongs to your earthly nature. And here he lists 5 things: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed. The underlying motive behind these 5 actions is that they are primarily self-centered. Right? If we wanted to look for a common thread amongst these 5, they are self-centered. The first 4 are clearly related to matters of sex and sexuality. The biblical idea of sex is that it is not about me fulfilling my desires or having my needs met or some kind of like self-gratification, but rather that I commit myself and give myself completely to someone who is completely different to me, someone who is completely other to me. The moment that sex becomes selfish and self-centered, the moment it becomes about me in any context, then I begin to veer into dangerous territory. And Paul emphasizes this in the final action, that is greed. This desire to focus purely on myself and not to be generous and not to be focused on the goodness of the other. Having said this, he moves on to a further set of actions in verse 8: anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language, and lying. These actions are focused on others. So the first 5 are focused on ourselves. These 6 are focused on others, but in a completely destructive way. Anger and rage speak to the act of completely flying off the handle. Maybe you've done that or you've seen that happen. Of losing control. The moments when one just sees red, potentially road rage, I don't know. And all self-control is just completely abandoned. Malice speaks to the intentional cultivation of evil. Where anger and rage speak more to a spontaneous act, malice is calculated and intentional. It plans, it plots, and it seeks the destruction of others. And then the final three here are related to speech: putting others down, lying, being deceptive, being crude. These actions are ultimately driven by and result in the harm of others. Now, the reality is, and I'm sure I'm not alone, but I'm the person who's speaking, that I've struggled and wrestled with all six of these. And I'm sure others here have as well. Some I wrestle with in greater depth than others, but I know that very rarely does one actually set out to be malicious or to be angry. Like no one lists that as a goal. Like, what goal do you want to work on? I just want to be more angry. Like no one's doing that. No one desires that. Often these behaviors grow or develop out of a dissatisfaction with how our life is going. This is why having an eternal perspective is crucial. This worked itself out in me. Like the realest example that I can give you is when I returned back from Vancouver. So originally had moved over there wanting to be there for 2 to 3 years to kind of do the academic thing, but ended up coming back after a year. So came back prematurely. And in that year, my hopes and my dreams, right, my picture of what my life was going to look like, just came to a dramatic stop. I'd gone from being in the room with brilliant professors and teachers and intellectuals and having great, deep conversations after class and being affirmed by them and being invited for coffee and like doing well in my grades and being told, like being encouraged really well. I'd gone from that to being the one student on the Zoom call, like on a computer at the back of the classroom, just seeing the back of everybody's heads, and watching other students now be affirmed and now be like the smart one and be like encouraged and loved on by others. And just like watching that. And in that context, my grades aren't doing as well as they used to, and I'm watching other people have the life that I felt like I should have. I grew angry and I grew bitter. And this anger that I had began to fester resulted in me at times being rageful and just like losing it completely. I found myself feeling malicious, right, to those students that I didn't even know that well, but were doing well in the class and getting the spotlight. They'd done nothing to me, but they were living the life that I wanted. So I wouldn't lie about them or I wouldn't slander them necessarily, but I would use my speech maybe to discredit them or to try and outsmart or outwit them, maybe to try and prove to myself even that I was smarter and that if I was there, I could do it. I'd lost sight of the big picture. And I think that all of us, in all of our contexts, are susceptible to wrestle with this in various ways. When our life doesn't look the way we wanted, we act out in harmful ways because we think that this life is all that there is. We don't achieve the promotion. We don't get into that uni course. We don't get that GPA that we wanted. That relationship breaks down. We don't manage to buy the right house in the right time frame or in the right location. Our relationships with our families, be it our parents or our spouse or our friends or our children, doesn't look the way we want it to. At times we just fail, we get it wrong, we lose, we face life-changing sickness, and we react in ways that aren't good. We're all human and we all make mistakes. I get that. No one deals with disappointment perfectly. But I wonder if having an eternal perspective, that is having the resurrection and the new creation, having that dominate our thinking and living our lives from that, I wonder that knowing that there is more to life than this life only, that if we embrace that and grounded ourselves in that reality, I wonder if it wouldn't help us better as we wrestle through our disappointments and complexities. I wonder if it wouldn't just help us process in a healthier way. In verse 12, Paul moves from rejecting certain types of behavior to now encouraging and affirming certain types of behavior. So, we'll move quickly. Verse 12, clothe yourselves, he says, with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Paul lists another 5. And then a more descriptive list in verses 13 to 17. He says, bear with one another, forgive one another, put on love. Let the peace of God rule in your heart. Be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell among you deeply, and do everything as unto the Lord. That is, do everything as if you were doing it for God. I won't go into detail on these. I think they're pretty self-explanatory, but just to note that these lists are the complete opposite of selfishness and self-centeredness. They are completely focused on the other. Compassion is something we show others. Patience is something we show others. Humility can only be performed in the context of another. Yes, there are times when we can forgive ourselves, and I understand the idea of being kind to yourself, but primarily these are actions that are directed at other people. And often these things take place in the context of disappointment. I can only forgive someone if they've wronged me, right? Like, I'm not going to forgive someone for being generous to me, right? Like, I'm not going to forgive someone for being kind. But if someone is rude or hurtful, they lie to me, or whatever it might be, that is the context in which I then offer forgiveness. I can only do that when I'm disappointed. No one forgives someone for being kind. I can only exercise patience when I'm in a situation that calls for impatience, right? I can only embrace peace when I'm in a situation where there is chaos, right? These actions are to be embodied in situations that are difficult. And finally, having addressed the community here, Paul turns to the family in verses 18 to 4:1. So we'll finish on this. I think it's fair to say that this passage in particular, and some of the themes in it and passages in the Bible like it, are some of the more widely discussed and debated topics of the Bible. It's the controversial stuff. And I will note that Jamie gave me the controversial stuff and then decided to go to New York, but that's okay. Also, it's some of the more triggering. And so I don't know everybody here, and I don't know everybody's story, but I do know that for some people, when they read stuff like this that Katie read for us, it can actually result in deep trauma, right? Because people's experiences can be hard. Particularly here in the topics of submission and slavery. So I want to just offer some quick thoughts before we engage. First, there's only so much we can do in a short amount of time. We have about 5 minutes left on the clock. And there is a wide variety of thoughts and opinions and perspectives on these verses. Some people here might think that I've said too much. Some people might think I haven't said enough. Some might think I'm being too liberal. Some might think I'm being too conservative. So that said, I welcome and I invite discussion afterwards. If you disagree with what I'm saying, please, I welcome that conversation. I don't have everything right. So please come and talk to me. If you think I could have handled it better, please come and talk to me. Second, I don't think that this passage is not without nuance. That is, these are not copy-paste universal truths that must be blindly followed. I think they have to be considered in their historical context. So, just by way of example, I reject, hear me clearly, I completely reject the idea that submission, particularly between a wife and her husband, must be upheld in a context where safety is questioned, right? Particularly of the wife and the child or children. Also, just recognizing that today, the way slavery outworks itself today primarily is in the context of young girls being trafficked. And I do not think for a second that the Bible condones or endorses this kind of behavior, right? So I do not think that we take this passage and say, well, just do it unto the Lord. I don't think that's what the Bible's saying. Hear me clearly. But with a passage like this, we have to give it space to breathe. It means not jumping to conclusions. It means allowing it to speak on its own terms. It means also, I think, that implications are best figured out through dialogue, through discussion, and it's going to differ from context to context. This passage and others like it have been used to harm others, right? And you just hear the history of just terrible abuse that's happened. But I am convinced that to its original audience, this passage, these words of Paul, was not a message of oppression, but one of liberation. Particularly for the women who are in the room, Paul is your best friend. So, if you do have questions, please come and chat to me That said, let's look at it and offer some thoughts. So first, you'll notice that 3 groups are mentioned, right? So we have wives and husbands, we have children and fathers, and we have slaves and masters. Okay, so 3 pairs. However, in all 3 pairs, the man is the same person, right? So the man is the husband, the man is also the father, and the man is also the master, like back in that context. So there is one instruction that Paul gives to the wife, there is one instruction that Paul gives to the child or the children, and there's one instruction that Paul gives to the slave, but there are 3 that Paul gives to the man. So the takeaway, I think, or at least just like basic idea, is for us men in the room, for the gentlemen who are here, whatever we take away from this passage, know that we have a huge responsibility. That this isn't a passage that's for us to kind of coerce others necessarily, but rather that the responsibility that God has given to us is huge. And before we get annoyed either at our children or our spouse, before we get annoyed at others for not doing what we think they should do, the key question is, are we doing what we should do? Are we loving? Are we not, to use the language of Scripture, embittering? Are we providing? Are we serving? Are we sacrificing? Are we laying our lives down? Paul, interestingly, seems more concerned with how we are acting, and by we I mean the men, how we are acting than others in the passage. I can't tell you how many sermons I've heard where the key takeaway is focused on the wife. I think to do that is to miss the passage by a mile. The second thing is notice how Paul identifies the 3 pairs, but each pair is radically different. Right? So the wife, or a wife, is exactly the opposite to a husband, right? A child is the exact opposite to a parent. And a master is the exact opposite to a slave. And the instruction that Paul gives to each pair is essentially that they should not serve their own interests, but the interests of the other. It is much easier for me to look out for those who look like me and talk like me. It is harder to serve those that don't look like me and don't think like me and don't agree with me. I've been married now for 6 years, and for some people in the room, that might seem like a long time, and for some people who are in the room, that might seem like no time at all. I've been married for 6 years, and I'm realizing more and more that the more I get to know Susanna, the more I realize I don't know her at all, right? Like, we are different in every sense of the word. Different genders, we're different colors, the difference is everywhere. The more I get to know her, the more I realize I don't know. Her way of doing something is almost always different from the way I would do it, right? Her way of thinking is completely different to the way I think. Her way of analyzing a situation is completely different, like almost all the time, to how I would analyze a situation. I'm often finding as well that the way that we parent is very different, right? Like, there's just so much difference there. She is very much other to me. But despite that difference, even though that difference does sometimes cause frustration, and though that difference sometimes does, how come you can't see it my way? Despite that, I'm to put her interests before my own. That's what Scripture's telling us, right? Children and parents, parents often maybe don't understand children don't understand parents, right? But we are to put the interests of the other before my own interests, right? I'm even fascinated now. I've been a parent for 2 years, and how already at 2 years, I'm trying to almost live my life through Zev. My hair is going, and so I want his hair to grow because but just noticing that that's dangerous. He's not there to kind of serve my needs or for me to live through him. I am here to give him everything I possibly can and to serve him as best as I possibly can. And finally, this passage shows us that in all things, we must look to Jesus as our example. So I mentioned before, if you are a woman, a child, or a slave, you are mentioned once in this text. If you are a man, you are mentioned 3 times. But there is someone mentioned in the passage 6 times, which is 3 plus those 3 ones combined. The Lord in this passage is mentioned 6 times. Clearly, Paul is pointing to Jesus as the guiding post for how we are to live and interact with others. The example of Jesus, to use the language of Colossians, the most supreme being, he humbled himself, he condescended himself to our level in order to serve and save us from the mess that we had created. He willingly laid down his life for our good. Right? That is what the Lord did, and that is the example that Paul is leaning on. It is easy when we read a passage like this to immediately get on the defensive, right? Husbands, love your wives. Well, if you had to live with my wife and you know what she did, then you wouldn't want to blah, 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 right? Like, it's easy to come up with excuses. It's easy to kind of find the exemption that might apply to us. Right? Forgive others as the Lord forgave you. Well, I can't forgive again because I've forgiven this person like 100 times and they keep on doing it. Forgive as Christ forgave. It's easy to come up with the reasons why we shouldn't. It's easy to think of why we shouldn't have to, or why we shouldn't need to, or why we might be exempt. What other people should do first, and then we might forgive or show compassion. Or that person should love, and then we might submit. Or that person should not embitter, and then I will obey. But that is not the way of Jesus. Jesus did not need to forgive us. Jesus did not need to save us. Jesus owed you and I nothing. Jesus did not need to love us the way that he did by sacrificing himself and literally laying down his life for our good. And yet he did, despite the hundreds of times that we get it wrong, despite the hundreds of times that we reject his way, he still humbled himself for us. And so in all of our relationships and all of our interactions, whether it be the ones that Paul specifies here, that is husbands, wives, children, parents, slaves, masters, or whether it might just be the person who's sitting on the same row as you, or the person in your life group, or the person that you might find yourself seeing on the bus frequently on the way to work, or your boss, or your colleague, whoever it might be, in whatever relationship or power dynamic that might be, Paul is saying, live your life in light of what Jesus has done and treat the other, no matter how much you agree with them, no matter how much they are kind to you or mean to you, no matter what it might look like, treat them the way that Jesus treated you. Be radically oriented towards the goodness of the other. Do not be self-seeking. Do not be self-satisfying. Do not have your own interests as your priority, because there is a life to come that is going to be better than this. And so if things don't work out the way we want, that's okay. Focus on the other, with Jesus being our chief example. So, here's